The following is a preview of a Patreon exclusive.
Okay, let's talk about Light Magic Part 2. So this is the continuation of... So we originally, if you didn't catch the first show, we were going to do all 6 episodes in one sitting, realized there was way too much stuff going on here, too many good memories, tons and tons of good stuff, really good content to dig into. So we decided to kind of break this up. And these last 3 episodes, so let's just I want to get your kind of initial thoughts, because the first 3 we talked about as being kind of like the quintessential Star Wars, ILM, boots in the ground, whatever it takes to make it happen. I mean, it felt like it was the genesis of Star Wars as we know it from every technical aspect that you could possibly think of. And It was really great stuff. And then when we get into the 4th episode, it leaves at the end of Empire. And so we're not into Jedi yet. So we know we still got Jedi coming. We've got the prequel trilogies and then the sequel trilogy. And of course, everything with Mando coming down the road here. But this really did kind of feel like this was the first break. And it's interesting because, I mean, the long short of it all is that ILM knew that they were onto something. George Lucas knew he was onto something, right? He was doing something that no one else was doing. And in between these shoots of Star Wars, what were these guys going to do? I just thought it was interesting that they were kind of spinning off and doing a couple crazy things. And we talked about that in the last episode, but really it was suddenly you had arguably who's my favorite director of all time and will always be my favorite director of all time, Steven Spielberg. But you had somebody with that kind of imagination now wielding the power of what ILM was putting out and beginning to develop in terms of special effects and sound and audio. And it was like the perfect timing, because you think about those movies that he was coming out with. I mean, there were stories that we're going to get into here with like E.T. There was the Poltergeist stuff that was going on. Of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark was the very first one that went out, but they were breaking ground with almost every single one of his movies. And it was like a kid really with a magic wand, as George Lucas's phrase. But yeah, what did you think about this first episode and kind of how it kicked off, talking about some of those Spielberg movies and the special effects that were kind of being broken in some of those?
Yeah, it was really cool. I mean, you started to see a bit of this churn, this kind of turn in what ILM could be and what it could represent. And really all in the name of just keeping people employed. I mean, that was kind of the interesting part about it, was that they just wanted to keep people employed because they knew, there's another movie. Hey, let's help George's friend. They did this kind of between Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back as well. But now you're starting to get more of these outside projects. And I thought this was a really cool turning point. I think episode 5 really started to see the change in ILM itself, I think. But
yeah,
this was a moment where I think you could start to see, I think with Steven Spielberg in particular, like, no, there's something unique. There's something different. There's something we can really push things forward here. There's a completely different way of thinking and problem solving that this group of people does. And I think that was really, I think that's one of the things the documentary series in totality really captured well, is that this was a group of people and an evolving group of people that came from different ways of life and different ways of thinking. And with just, what do we need to do to make a movie great?
Mm-hmm.
How do we put in this work? What does it look like? How do we make it happen? How far can we push ourselves? And then you have people like George Lucas and you have Steven Spielberg and later James Cameron and others that say, well, here's kind of the idea I have. What do you think you can do? And by the way, I need it like in 6 or 8 months,
Yeah, right.
I mean, you always need the pressure, right? In the timeline. Mm-hmm. So I just thought that was really cool. And again, we start to see the actual innovation of ILM and this really, really considerable and substantial transition start to begin with what ILM was about to go through. And I thought it was really cool, though, to see some of the stuff with Dennis Muren and with Phil Tippett, the Rancor. Some of the things they were doing on Jedi, I think, were a lot of fun, too.
Yeah.
And I don't think they should be understated, especially when they were doing like the little models through we've all seen people, they would walk through the forest with the cameras on their chest, right?
Right.
I didn't realize they actually completely filmed the entire sequence using just little models of them, like, it was like us playing with toys, right?
Yeah.
We made this model railroad on seahorses or seesaws. There we go. Sawhorses.
Sawhorses. There we go.
Right. Other way around. Yeah. like you would like a model train set.
Right.
And it was just really cool to be able to see some of that. But yeah, I really like that we see the genesis of ILM becoming the ILM that we know, that they would eventually become.
And this episode it's kind of bittersweet, right? Because the end is coming. You know,
Yeah, you can see it on the wall too. Yeah,
everybody sees it on the wall, but at least in this time frame, right at the end of Empire Strikes Back, up until we get to Terminator 2, there's kind of like this magical period where we don't have the advancement of computer graphics yet, right? It's there, but it's very early
it's all
and
in the
not.
background. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Or the Genesis footage that I want to talk about from Star Trek 2. But yeah, I mean, it's so very early. You still got like Phil Tippett, doing models, and stop motion animation is still a big thing, and it is kind of the go-to. But on top of that, you've got this kind of blooming kind of technology that will eventually lean itself into what we have as far as computer graphics. And so everybody seemed happy. It was almost euphoric, right? When they were,
yeah.
it's kind of like the golden age. And yet the writing was on the wall. You could see that this was all about to come to an end.
About when the
And
bottom falls out, right?
yeah, which is it was really kind of that. I mean, that really gets to me here in, I guess, in the next episode. But
Yeah, it
I
was
want to go
really
back
hard.
to Steven Spielberg because it starts off with him talking about how this was a fun place. He called it, they knew how to make magic and have fun at the same time. It was a fun house. It was a playhouse. And the story of Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, George Lucas will probably forever be known as Star Wars first, but
Right.
right there at a close second is Raiders of the Lost Ark and
That was
Indiana
his
Jones.
idea. Yeah.
Yeah. So and the whole story, and I've heard this story before. Like if you're an indie fan and you watch some of the BTS stuff, or you just know kind of the background on how it all kind of came to be, about that infamous trip that was made out to Hawaii, and because George wanted to get away, the anxiety of being around, on the day of release was just way too much for him, and so, like every other normal person, what do? We all go to Hawaii, right, to go hang out
Yeah,
with
sure.
our $1 million director friend and just kind of cut loose. But yeah, so having him, like, getting to see that story, or Spielberg tell that story again in present day about how he had that idea and he was like sold on it, and they just kind of jumped in. And arguably, I mean, all three of those movies are really good. It kind of just speaks to George Lucas's creativity and how I really wish the advancement in technology would have come a lot faster. Because I don't want to step too far off to the side here, but if you imagine, like, George Lucas had the power that he had in the prequel trilogy, right? The ability to almost create anything that he wanted. But if you think about where we were in 1999 as opposed to where we are today, you take a George Lucas, and no disrespect for Spielberg, because I know he's still doing really good stuff, but you take those two guys and put them today and think about what they possibly could churn out with the technology, with the advancements in computer graphics that we have today. And I think it would really change the landscape of film. And I'm just wondering if there's going to be, maybe it's a question that I have for you, but not to put these guys on too high of a pedestal, because I know there's some really amazing directors and creative people out there today. But I just always question whether or not we're going to have, like, when will we have the next Spielberg? When are we going to have the next George Lucas that tells the modern myth in the way that George Lucas was able to? I just don't know that we ever will, at least not in my lifetime. But what do you think?
Yeah, it's really tough. And I think that's what they started to get in episode 6, actually. It's coming full circle, right? So in this time, it was very much, what can we do visually? How can we push this forward? How can we tell the stories we want to tell? But now it's come back around of saying, okay, like you were saying, now we can do anything we want.
Right.
It has to come back to story now.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where the writing and things like that are all the more important, and that seamless story. And this is why this is why the sequel trilogy struggles a bit, right? Is because of this. If you don't have this consistency and those coherence with the writing and the story, then you are missing out. You can do everything you want visually. That's not a problem anymore.
Right, and they demonstrated that in the sequel trilogy. I mean, there's some
Right.
amazing, glorious effects that we'd never seen, and they didn't get the limelight that they did or should have, but maybe because of the story.
Well, I mean, and now these days we just expect it, right? We
Right.
expect them to be able to do anything that's humanly possible in our imagination.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a boundary there anymore. I mean, you and I can do a lot of things today with consumer based tools.
Yeah. You want me to
That
run the intro right now? Hold on. Here, no, I'm just kidding.
right. I mean, that's the thing though. We can do some of these things ourselves that they were pioneering back 30 years ago. And so anyway, but it is coming back to full circle. So where I think you have people like Spielberg and even and like Lucas, but I think it's going to come back to the story aspect. And we know the one thing that people are really having a hard time with right now is coming up with an original story, something that really feels fresh and that feels unique, and even taking older themes and putting them into a newer, fresher light, tends to be pretty difficult. Now, I think some of that is a testament to what we had with things like Raiders of the Lost Ark and ET, right? Because
Hmm.
these were great stories and the visual effects were good enough at the time as well. And I think there's a part of me that's like, if I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark today with all the modern ways that we have filmmaking, I don't know that it would have the same effect. And I'm kind of wondering if, even something like Kingdom of the Lost Skull, the fourth Indiana Jones,
Right. Which we don't talk
it,
about, but go on, please.
right, we don't talk about, but I mean, sometimes I wonder if some of the effects are chipping away a little bit at what maybe would have been an okay story or been a little bit stronger had this been in a different era.
Hmm.
Right. And so it's kind of a question of, maybe sometimes, well, I don't want to go there. I don't want to belittle Steven Spielberg of all people because he's amazing, of course.
No,
But
I'll punch you right through the screen.
no, I would too. I'd do it myself. I'd be like, finish the job for you.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
No,
But
I'm
no, I
not.
mean,
But go on, please.
it's a thing though. I mean, I think that it's coming back to story. The visual effects are not the story, but how do you do that to enhance and tell the story? I think that's what we're struggling with now.
Yeah.
And at the time, it was a complete 180. I can't tell the story without these visual effects because there's just no way I can do it and actually make it seem engaging and not seem fake.
Right.
Right. And that's where things like Poltergeist in particular, that was really cool to see how they did the house. Right. I mean, that was just incredible.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
these ideas of sucking it through a tube, but also taking shotguns and blowing it apart to make sure it actually goes down
Right.
the
Yeah.
tube, which is incredible. I had
Yeah.
no idea with some of that stuff, and again, creative problem solving is always it's such a fun thing. And these people would probably, you'd meet them on the street and be like, yo, you don't think any different of them. But then they get in this environment of their territory, and the simplest of ideas sometimes could be amazing.
Yeah. And I think we'll talk more about this when we get to the final episode because to your point, the stuff that Favreau is doing right now, right? That return to practical effects and to real effects and kind of that hybrid of using both now where it makes sense to do one versus the other because I still think I mean at the end of the day, I'm not going to sit here and say that you can't achieve everything that you can't achieve everything that you want to do in a movie by only using special effects. I
Right.
think I don't believe that. I think you can, right? But where does it become? It becomes cost prohibitive at some point, or it takes too much time, or we're still not there where we can do anything and everything we want to, right? So at some point that will no longer be an argument. And some would say today that's not really an argument either. But where I think what you're leaning into here is that when you have people that are not so hyper focused on the special effects, to Spielberg's point in this thing, he says once the what was this quote? Something about once the story is the special effects, you've lost or we've
Right.
lost you, right? And I think that's what too many of the movies today are suffering from, right? They seem very stylized. It's very kind of I don't want to say it's the TikTok brain, but very snappy, very quick. A lot of it's hidden in quick shots. You don't really get to see it all. And when we get away from practical effects, we lose a lot of that stuff. And I think that's what really kind of gets you engrossed in the movie. I think it entrenches you in the spirit and entrenches you in the emotion, the weight of those. And when it's too plastic, I think that certainly gets lost. So I don't want to sound like an old dude here.
And of course, in episode 6 of the series, we're going to completely undo everything you just said
Yeah,
and prove that you don't know what you're talking about,
yeah, that's very true.
because we were both shocked how episode 6 went.
Yeah, exactly. We so on that point, Lauren had chimed in earlier and said we need more strong writers making movies. I would agree, and I think not to bring up Ready
Writing,
Player One,
writing is hard. I mean,
it is hard. It is very.
yeah,
Not to bring up Ready Player One, but when you see somebody like Spielberg, who's in my opinion with George Lucas one of the greatest imaginative minds, creative minds that we've had in our lifetime, right? He got so excited after reading Ready Player One because it was so different. Like even the movies that are coming out now, I know I'm not dissing any of them, but the Marvel movies and everything else. I mean, we've kind of all seen that before, and it just keeps getting better. They're great movies. I'm not saying anything of that, but where are the movies that are coming from? Where are the stories that are truly cutting edge, like the stories that we were getting back in the early '80s, mid '80s, even into the '90s. I think they're kind of few and far between, unfortunately, and that's my opinion. Again, I may sound like an old curmudgeon out here talking about this stuff, but to Lauren's point, some of those writers aren't there, and I think that's why Spielberg got so excited about making Ready Player One because it was completely different. I mean, it was one of those stories that had never really been done. It was cutting edge and breaking in terms of on the front lines of technology mixed in with something that had never been done before. But there aren't too many of those. We don't see them very often, and maybe I'm missing them. Maybe they're making their way to like television shows or animation now, right? And we're getting away from some of the cinematic stuff. But
Yeah, and I think the cool thing with Ready Player One, I mean, it was like made for Steven Spielberg, right?
yeah,
It's a show that, I mean, I was glad they did some. You can actually see the motion capture in this series too, which I thought was really cool. That was going into Ready Player One, but I think it's one of these things that you need those. This is a great example of it. You need the visuals to make that movie work.
mm-hmm.
Without those visuals, it just doesn't
You can't
work.
tell it.
You can't bring Ernie Klein's imagination to life and his vision to life without seeing all of these, these nostalgic and just iconic type of characters and music and everything else, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's the part where that helps enable the storytelling, and I think that's really what the desire was. That was the driver with all of this, and I think episode 4 really encapsulated that so well of saying, this is helping me tell that story. Without this, I really can't give you the story that you want and that I think you need, and I think that you would really like. And I think that was critical for that. And I think, the way that ILM is able to present that in a way that, George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were able to pull that out of them is absolutely incredible that people are able to do this and kind of push themselves to that limit.
So Jeff chimed in here with a really great point. He said also less cynical people, I would say, a lot of the magic from the ILM crew and people like Spielberg and all that came from the relentless optimism.
You hear it from Steven Spielberg all the time. I mean, and
Yeah.
George Lucas too. Well, just think about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I know you don't think you can do it,
Just think about it.
but just think about it.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's so simple, right? I mean, and it's not as superfluous as, I like that, but faster and more intense. It's actually, no, I want you to like think about problem solving. Like, there is a solution here. We just don't know it. And I think that really came across throughout these last 3 episodes in particular. It's like, we are on the cusp of something. We just can't quite reach it, but they have got the right people in place to really push themselves and to be like Jeff was saying, just relentless with what they are able, with the effort. It's not even optimism. It's just the amount of effort that they're willing to put into this. And we heard this with Spaz and with Mike DePay saying, we'll just work all nights of the hour, all hours of the night and push this forward to try to figure this out because we are right on the cusp of something really, truly amazing.
The other thing that this episode kind of continued to do for me, and we mentioned this in the last one, but it was just, we've got these like really, what's the word? Legendary people, right? We've got the Dennis Murins. We've got Ed Catmull's, the Phil Tippett's,
Ken Ralston.
I mean, it was, seeing people like Frank Marshall. It was great to see Frank Marshall. I mean, he's behind so many of the movies, like Kathleen Kennedy as well. Say what you want about the sequel trilogy and what she's done at Disney, but you cannot deny that her name is behind so many of the movies that we grew up with. And
if anything, that was really interesting to see her like so present throughout a lot of this.
Yeah.
The one things I liked, and I'm sorry to interrupt you. The one things I liked about this is that as we go through each episode, you see the titles of what they were doing change.
Yeah.
And you see that progression in their career and also their responsibility and what they were trying to push forward. So I really enjoyed seeing that this is who they were in that moment and then where they ended up and, how they continued through that. So anyway, try to wrap it. It was something we didn't talk about last time, but
yeah, no, exactly. And my point was really just, I don't know if it's a matter of, because now everything is computer generated and it's just, some development team that we don't know the names of, right? They're kind of working as a team. Maybe that's a good thing.
Hey everyone, it's Jonesy. We hope you've enjoyed this preview of the Patreon episode. If you'd like to listen to the episode in full, we invite you to head over to cantinacast.com/Patreon. Access to this episode begins at the $2 After Dark tier. If you're interested in joining a future Patreon episode, we encourage you to check out our Now Part of the Tribe and Delusions of Grandeur tiers. You can find all the details at cantinacast.com/Patreon. On behalf of Albert and myself, thank you all for your continued support, and may the force be with you.